So we're live now.
Hopefully.
Oh no, it's Margaret
There
frozen.
we go.
Oh, there we go. Good.
Thank you, everybody. This is Margaret. Thank you all for coming. I see people are already in the chat because I seeded it. So excellent. Nice to see all the friends here. We're here for a very exciting discussion of this book, A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine, otherwise known as Dr. Anna Linden Weller. So we'll be talking a lot about the book and author and all the little things about the universe. But first I wanted to introduce my co-discussants here. This is a buddy reading with Katja of Katja Read, Write, Create. And we read this sort of together over the last month on the urgings of my other co-host here, Amrita, by the book. So welcome everybody, say hello. And Katja, why don't you tell us a little bit about your channel first?
Hi, I'm Katja, fellow booktuber. I always say that I'm also going to do AuthorTube, but I haven't got round to that yet. But I'm an eclectic reader, and that's about it. So do check out the channel.
And Amrita, what are you featuring on yours? What's going on with your channel?
Oh, hi. My name is Amrita, and my channel is called Amrita by the Book. Thanks for having me, Margaret. And I've been on a bit of a hiatus for I'm having a few medical issues, but there's a whole bunch of, videos on my channel if you'd like to check it out. It's like Katja, I am an eclectic reader. There's a whole bunch of very varied stuff on my channel. I think that's basically how the three of us got to be friends, I think, on BookTube, is because there was just so many different things going on our channels. So yeah, check it out.
Awesome. Oh, and it looks like we have some taste testing. Graham and peanut butter cup. Was that a thing? Was that a thing you were telling JD to try?
I had a thought the other day. I was like, what if JD had a nut allergy? His life would be so different. It makes me want to tear up. That's terrible. I'm so glad that you don't have a nut allergy.
Yeah, our horizons are expanded from our tolerance for sure. Speaking of tolerance, let's talk about empire. Okay, so as I said, this is a pseudonym for Anna Linden Weller, and she describes herself 3 ways on her website: a city planner, a policy analyst, and a Byzantinist. That's how I'm going to say it, which means an expert on Byzantine Empire. So I was very excited to read that because those are all things I'm pretty much into. And so I was like, oh, wow, connection here is high quality. So I wanted to ask, normally I ask, just so people can have some context, why did you pick up this book? What drew you to it, to see if other people would also be drawn to it? And for me, speaking for myself, it was that one's recommendation. And I was like, well, obviously have to read this, because if you look at Amrita's review, it is stellar. That's a pun. Thank you. Thank you very much. What about you? What about you guys?
Well, for me, it was the same, because obviously we'd seen the same review by Amrita, and she talked about it. I thought, oh, that's brilliant. Had a chat with you. I don't know how. It was a while back, and you stuck it on a Post-it note to say that we're doing a buddy read. And we almost forgot about this. And then Margaret was like, are we buddy reading something in August? And thankfully, yes, yeah. So we both heard about it from you, Amrita.
Thank God for Post-it notes.
I am so thrilled when I'm thrilled when people actually take my suggestions, especially when I'm a pretty generous reader. When I read something, I'm inclined to be kind towards books. I'm not very it has to be egregiously bad for me to be wow, this book really sucked. So I tend to be somewhere between 3 and 4 stars when I'm when I'm grading. But I have very few books that are 5-star reads. And when I discover a 5-star read, I am completely evangelically in love with those books. That's what it means for me when I say this was a 5-star read for me. And unfortunately, the evangelical part of it like really comes true and I'm discussing it with like other people. So I love it when people actually listen to me and like pick up the books that I recommend, because I'm just like, you have to read it. Yeah. But then it also like really makes me happy when people read it, and then I don't demand that they love it all the time. Usually I'm just happy if you've just listened to me and like picked up the book and given it a try. But if people actually do engage with it and they feel even a smidgen of the feelings that I feel for the books that I love, I'm just like, yes. So yeah, I'm very happy right now that both of you picked it up, and I'm hoping that both of you liked it. So yeah.
Excellent.
So I'll just very quickly say I didn't give it 5 stars, but I did enjoy it very much.
That's all I need. That's all I need.
And I gave it 4.75. So I had a really good week this month. So it was up there, but it was like, there are things that I was like, okay. Yeah, but that's all pretty good. How about classification? We're still, for anyone worried, in the non-spoiler part of this discussion. What about classification? How would you where would you place this in the genre of books? I said sort of SFF/thriller. It's very broad.
I mean, I have extended thoughts about it, so maybe Katja should go first.
Yeah, sure. I would, broadly go with SFF as well, and I'm tempted to put it into the genre of like space opera, because we're going rather than the hard sci-fi, we're really going into relationships. But yeah, that's pretty much as far as I thought about it. But I wasn't, and I don't know if this is going to digress, but I wasn't surprised to find out the author had done her PhD in history and was inspired by that, because there's a lot of, like real life interactions and between nations and stuff running through it. So yeah.
I describe this as colonialism in space. Like that's how I've described it all throughout. And it is science fiction to me. Like it's very much science fiction. But it's also, you're right, like there is a thriller element to it. Like that's how the book really begins, and that's a setup. But I think it's interesting, like, the description that Arkady Martine gives of herself as a policy analyst, a city planner, and a historian, because she very skillfully, in my opinion, weaves all 3 of those elements within this book, because there is a very extensive world building aspect to this novel, like how the society functions, how the city functions at the heart of this empire, and the policies of that empire, and the policies of this, this little space station that's trying to negotiate with it. And yeah, there is a thriller element to it as well. I think that's like the structure that keeps the whole thing going. That's the overarching plot structure, I think, so the thriller aspect for the novel.
Yeah, I totally agree. She's worked in all her fields of expertise so deftly. It's lovely. Yeah, between the tech and the politics and everything. So that leads perfectly into parallels between this fictional world and the world that we know of historically and presently, and current stuff. So elements of this world that really hit like hammer on nail, that you went, oh gosh, I wonder what she's referring to. And it popped out to you that you wanted to lead with.
So for me, I think like the reason why I really fell in love with this book is because it addressed colonialism in a way that I have seen very few books, science fiction, fantasy, whatever, really deal with, which is, generally speaking, like when we're talking about colonialism, it's really about like, it's about the resource mining, like this is how cruel an empire can be, how cruel the experience of colonialism can be. And this particular book, like obviously it deals with all of that, and especially in the sequel, which is again excellent. But what it really does is that it talks about microaggressions, like there's like, and we'll go into that, I guess, later on when we are getting into the spoiler part of this live. But there's like the microaggressions, but also there is this desperate longing that our main lead has to belong to this empire, and how much she feels attracted to its culture, to its literature, and how much she's invested into trying to belong to that culture, which will always see her as an outsider. And that dynamic to me was like, oh, this is like really different. I don't really see this very often. And I really, like, that really caught me, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that you said, definitely. And it is something that you can imagine right now. And it's interesting to see it perpetuated, but also interesting to think that it has been, like we are at this stage, but it's been perpetuated for I don't know how many years. And it just seems to keep going. So I can actually imagine something like that happening in the future, rather than us being these really evolved beings and getting beyond this. But what I was thinking about as well is that idea of how they contacted the space station. So this is getting a little bit into the plot to get our main character to come across. And it's just so, I guess the word is really arrogant. And that idea of, this stronger empire just demanding to have something that they want and not actually giving any context as to, why they want them. So I don't know if I'm allowed to go into them actually putting a request in for Mahit to go across to the planet, or if that's going too far ahead. But I just thought that was really arrogant to actually not say why they're requesting a new ambassador to the planet without actually saying what's happened to the last ambassador. I was like, well, bloody hell, like, can't you give any context? And then immediately, because they're this huge empire and this is just a tiny little space station, they're like, oh yeah, okay, we've got to send a new ambassador.
Yeah, talk about an information imbalance. It's like retaining that power imbalance by like not providing any information and just demanding tribute essentially with the ambassador. I really like, so I'm sorry that my internet is breaking up. Of course it is. So I'm not hearing everything you're saying, but I'm going to try to grasp onto the things that I can hear. Amrita was saying that it talks about microaggressions in a way that other colonialism treatments do not. And one of the things that I really saw coming up again and again very intentionally was the main character whose mind we're in most of the time, Mahit. That's how I'm saying her name. We're also going to talk about language and pronunciation, but intentionally hearing, I really love this thing, but is it me, or is it the training in me that is calling out to support this idea? It's a constant internal battle for her of, is it something that I appreciate, or is it something that I've been trained to appreciate? And I think that really gets into like the personal mental gymnastics of how much have I been taught to think this way, and how much of this is actually objectively right. And I think that's a really good characterization of being a small pawn in a big empire's plan. So I just wanted to tack that on too.
Yeah.
Okay, what other features that jumped out? Let's see, we have space colonizers versus border countries. I also talked about the urban inequity. We've got the city planning part. There's an urban part of the empire, which is called the jewel of the world. And they've got suburbs and bad neighborhoods and stuff. And so that's very much reflected in the world that we're looking into. Does anyone want to talk about the literature? Like the love of literature that Mahit has from a very young age, and she wants to be an ambassador and trains to do this, and then how it turns around on her a little bit.
I don't know how to do that without being a little bit spoilery. I think that's the problem.
Okay. All right. Well, we can save it for the end part. Then why don't we can talk
I
about.
can try a little bit, but it's less about the language for me because so obviously there's that huge love of language that runs throughout the book and her love of language. But for me, it was quite interesting that her love for that is what drove her to become an ambassador. And to a certain extent, it got me wondering: is she a little bit naive when she went into all of this? Because she quite she goes in trusting her side, so to speak, if we're talking about sides, trusting the people on the space station who are sending her, so sort of implicitly, and also not really having an idea of what else over the last, I don't know, it was around, was it 15 years that they hadn't heard from the last ambassador? What had they been doing and what were their intentions and that sort of thing? And she quite excitedly goes down without really thinking about it until she's there. That's when she starts to pass out all of these issues. And I'm like, okay, well, you can love language, but you've just gone into this giant empire. And I don't know, I felt like she was a little bit naive, which was probably quite useful for the plot.
Yeah, but I also think that was that made sense because the original ambassador wasn't supposed to be done with his shift, so to speak. So she was probably supposed to be in training for another few years. It's very clear from the beginning, to me at least, that she wasn't expecting any of that to happen or for her to be sent as ambassador. So I think she was probably, and also again, there's that device that, the memory device, which, is a bit of a McGuffin in the plot, but is also, so essential to how her culture depends on that device basically in every walk of life. So it was just very interesting to me to see her spend so much time not just on trying to solve the murder, but also trying to find her own path in a way that she had never imagined that she would,
Yeah. And I guess that's the thriller aspect that Margaret was talking about, isn't it? That runs throughout the story. But like you're saying, at the start, I did think of the technology side of things being a MacGuffin, and then sort of towards the end, I thought, okay, I can start to see the different uses of that because. And I don't know, Margaret, if you've got a question about technology, because then I'll park the thought that I'm having at the moment. Okay, so with the technology side of things, Amrita, you just made me think about, the use of that device. On the space station, they obviously keep it really secret. This is part of who they are. It's part of their identity. And this idea that the empire does tend to sort of absorb the best of other people's things and then make it their own and evolve it and stuff. And I was then looking at the technology that they've got on the space station and then coming in with the city technology. And that idea of, I don't know if you guys felt a bit weirded out with the police and how they're integrated into the city technology, because the whole time, the Teixcalaan people are all about, our individuality and who we are as people from Teixcalaan. But then you've got a system in place where almost all the police lose some sort of identity at some point when they link in with their city. And I thought that was, interesting.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this book definitely has a lot to say about, I'm sorry, my brain is not working really well these days, but what do you call, not suspension, not supervision, what do you call it when people are just monitoring you? It's an S word.
Surveillance.
Surveillance, thank you. this is how bad my brain has gotten over the past month. But yeah, this novel definitely has a lot of things to say about surveillance tech and about how societies integrate surveillance tech into their everyday life to a point where they are making compromises for security and for convenience. But in actual fact, what they're doing is giving up their individuality and their ability to lead a private life in many ways and to take any kind of action that is not being monitored by, the eye in the sky sort of a thing. And there was a point where I kind of wondered if Arkady Martine was British, because I know, Britain has had a number of these debates over the past few years because of the surveillance that London has, for example. You can't go in that city without a camera being pointed at you, at some point. And right now we're looking at China, and we're looking at how the Chinese are using face tech, a surveillance technology to basically record your faces. And that's being rolled out in the United States, and it's being rolled out in India at airports, for example. And you can see already how it's being misused. So these are very real world things that she just pulled in, and she wrote about it. And I am so excited for you guys to read the sequel, Katja, because
I was going to ask about that because I'm excited to read it too. But I was I've got so many questions.
So in my opinion, this is a standalone. You can read it as a standalone novel because it does complete an arc, So you can read it as a standalone novel, but it's really written as a true duology. So, if you read part 1 and part 2, there are all the thematic things that you will, that we've mentioned so far, for example, technology, language, all that. All of that is basically, it continues in the sequel. And you basically, it sort of comes together as a whole when you're reading the two together. Which was one of the more exciting, reading experiences that I had over the past year, I think, because it just came together like that. It's great.
So I'm definitely excited for the second book. I mean, the first book, as 4.5, I think, almost that 5 mark. There was a question for me around her passion for her country, and obviously we're always going to feel passionate about our countries. I say that even though I've grown up in so many different places that it's a little bit tricky for me, but I can understand her protectiveness over the space station. This is the place that she grew up and everything. But what's difficult is because of that love for this empire, we learn all about the empire and her trying to find her place in it, but we don't learn much about the space station as a whole and why it is worth her protecting as much as she tries, if that makes sense.
Yes. There is definitely stuff in the second book that deals with the space station and what's going on there, the political aspects of things that are happening, but I don't want to give you too much information about that.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Margaret. We missed you.
I missed you too. I don't like the robot voices. The robot voices that I can hardly tell anything is. I can hardly distinguish any sounds that are human. It's not fun. Sorry, I keep popping up, everybody. It's an internet issue with my connection. So I assume you've all had great comments. I'm seeing a few. The things reflected in what JD is saying. So yes, I can't wait to get to the sequel either. Let's see if I have a little bit of some time where I'm lucent here. I want to talk about, lucid. Thank you. That was me. That wasn't my connection. I thought we'd go through some of the words, and so Katja listened to the audio version, but I think Amrita and I both read the paperback book, and so we came up with our own pronunciations. But I just wanted to give people a feel for what sort of world building the language gave us. So the things that we learn at first. See if the banners will work here. Not. There we go. Okay. So this is a person who helps the cultural attaché, basically, for the ambassador Mahit when she arrives on the jewel of the world. So how would you say this?
A secretan?
It sounds like secretary. Yeah, that's how I went with too. That's what the idea was.
That's what the narrator
and then
said.
Okay. Then we've got the piece of technology that we've alluded to that is part of the space station culture that is protected.
Imago.
I said imago in my head. I kept
narrator,
flipping between imago.
The narrator went with imago, so I don't know.
Imago. Yeah. I sort of kept flipping back and forth in my head, so I didn't end up deciding, I suppose.
I guess imago and imago, like it sounds like a British versus American thing, you know, like potato kind of a thing, you know, like imago sounds a little too informal. I guess we'll go with imago, but yeah, no.
This was a scientist person who was in a ministry doing work either with technology or with medicine. I think the first one we see is in the morgue. So, yeah.
So
I went with...
Yeah, what did you go with?
I went with Ishplanadal, and this is why I have like leanings of like Mayan and Aztec, because that's sort of what I associate with Quetzalcoatl. Like that's how I learned how to pronounce it. The X's as sounds and the TLs as ending of words. And so I was sort of getting an amalgamation of different empires in history from these choices. How about you?
I got the same. I had the same thing. Yeah. What about the narrator?
Well, they went with what JD is saying in the comments. So he's put it out there properly, explanatal or something like that. So yeah, exactly the way he's broken it down on the chat.
Huh.
All right, it's not letting me do the comments. There we go. Show up. Okay. And then we've got the language. That is the language of the empire. If that will show up. That was another one with the
That's really interesting to me that they didn't go with the Aztec thing, because if you look at the cover of the book, you know, like that's a very you have that. Okay,
sorry.
I can't.
The paperback, not the hardcover.
Okay. Well, if you look at the hardcover, I can't really tell if that's the same thing that you have. But if you look at the hardcover, the cover of the hardcover book, it's very Aztec inspired. You know, it's the steps that are leading up to the sun throne. And it's very much like a Mesoamerican sort of inspired cover. So I genuinely thought like they must be like she must have like taken things from like the Mayans and the Aztecs, as Margaret was saying, you know.
Interesting. So. I'll have to look it up. That's not. I don't have that in my head. For some reason, I've only seen this one. So I said this Teixcalaan. What did you get from the narrator?
So I said Teixcalaan. So for some Teixcalaan, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what the narrator was saying. They said Teixcalaan, and then I was really struggling when you say the nationals of the place as well, because the ending is then Li that they tag on, isn't it? So then they became Teixcalaan Lee. I was like, this is. I'm glad I got the audiobook.
So this is what I was actually saying to Margaret earlier, which is that when it comes to, I have like two opposing like theories when it comes to pronouncing names in science fiction fantasy, which is that if an author is rooting their story, and this is, I think, particularly applicable to fantasy more than science fiction, but if they've rooted their stories in a particular culture and they're very, adamant about it being related to that particular culture. So, for example, if it's like, Nigerian fantasy, and they're very clear that this is Nigerian set fantasy, then obviously I'm going to make an effort to try and give it, its proper pronunciation. And usually authors like that will have like a, something at the back that says that, like this is how we pronounce certain words or certain letters in our language. And that's important to me. So then I feel like it makes a lot of sense for me to go that extra step and be like, fine, like I'm going to do that. But 9 times out of 10, like especially when, because I grew up reading a lot of classic fantasy and a lot of classic science fiction, and that is basically just like, just random, like I'm just going to make this thing up, and when it comes to that, I feel like there's a section of the readership, particularly online, that gets very gatekeepery about like, how we pronounce certain names or certain like things. And I have no time for that kind of nonsense. I'm just like, look, this is just made up nonsense names. Like I'm going to say it however it makes sense to me. And if it's not exactly how the author came up with, then the author can say, at like a author discussion or like an author whatever, and if they really feel that particular about it, then they can talk about it, and then I'll correct myself. But unless I hear that from an author, I'm not going to have like a bunch of fans tell me like I can't say things the way that I want to, because I'm a fan too, and I get to have the same kind of experience that you do, so that's where I stand.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. I got the end of that, I think. I was just going to say that the way that she adds endings, I don't know if you noticed, but there was a lot of Teixcalaan li, Teixcalaan lim, and the way that she added.
I know that's going to be a cliffhanger now.
I know. What did she do with the Teixcalaan li and the Teixcalaan lim?
Oh, Margaret.
Why?
Okay, let me get it in. Okay, the way she added suffixes really reminded me of Turkish language, and I know it's modernized language for the 20th century. I don't know if this is going through, but it did remind me of that. And the fact that she did Byzantine history, I think, okay, maybe that's connected, because I recognized it as that sort of linked that way. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. And then the last one, cut. And I don't want to risk putting the banner up there, but that's what it looked like. But yeah, so those are some of the fun words and language discussion. I'm sure it was great. I'll come back and watch it and be wowed by how genius you guys are, but we can move on. Characters. Let's just talk about some characters. Which were the most interesting and which did you find lovable? Those are the 2 most interesting points that I find. So we have Mahid, our protagonist, but who else around her or who she interacted with did you like?
I like Katja go first.
I can't remember all the names, but of course
the names are quite something.
Yeah. So, for example, the person who is her attaché, who's assigned to her, is a really lovable character. At first, I did wonder about her, but it's interesting. She was called 3 something, wasn't she? But then her nickname is Reed. Seagrass. So she's 3 Seagrass. And then she's got this nickname from her best friend. So he called her Reed. And so then I got used to her being called Reed, which is a lot easier. And he was 12 something, and I don't know. But it was interesting. You move on from like the nature names and you go into the technological names. I think there was somebody helicopter. And I was like, this is getting interesting.
Yeah. The one I emailed you guys about was like the one with all-terrain tundra vehicle or something, and I just thought that was hilarious. That was a great example of the author putting forward something ridiculous. The audience can also see, oh, okay, this is the normal sphere, and then this is the ridiculous sphere. So giving us like a scale to measure these names on, which was helpful for me at least, and I just laughed at that name.
Yeah, the names took me a while to get around, and I'm generally good with like science fiction fantasy names because I have this. I don't know if you guys can do this, but like I just skim over like really difficult names when I'm like really in the rhythm. So then I'll just remember names by like the first letter and the last letter, and I can just. I don't know, like my brain just knows like this is that character and then that is that other character by just like reading the first letter and the last letter of the name. I don't know. And then like, like if I come to the end of the book and I really like the book, then I'll go back and I'll make an effort to actually like focus on the name and be like, okay, this person's name is like, like 3 Seagrass or 12 Azalea or whatever.
Yeah.
But this particular book was a challenge, even with that, because I couldn't do it for some reason. Because it was like 2 names, so it wasn't just like 1 name. So I really needed to like focus, and I had to learn the names like from the get-go. And I was just like, ooh, like this is hard.
Yeah, I can't claim that because obviously I was being read to on. So the audiobook read the names to me, but I absolutely would do that if I was reading a physical book. I'm okay to like skim the names. So yeah.
Does that make your head explode, Margaret? Like, as an author, knowing that you spend hours and hours coming up with like the perfect name, and then ingrates like myself are just like bloop, bloop 1 and bloop 2.
I missed that. I heard Margaret as an author something about names, but maybe you can put it in the chat or private chat so that I can see it. Because I can't hear you guys.
So sad. Okay.
I will say people didn't know how to pronounce a few of the names in my series, and I talked about it in various talks. Like there's a Muirne, and it's like Myrna for English audiences, and so I just let people like I don't know if I put it in a blog post or what, but I think I just like put that out. Everyone's super worried about this. Here you go, like Myrna Loy. So yeah, but
Oh, poor Margaret.
That's really hard. Her question about the characters, though, I did like 3 Seagrass, but it takes a while to actually get into the characters. I mean, even Mahit, even though we're in her head, so usually I'm a really character, based reader. I really like to hook into a character, and that's where I go. And I enjoyed sticking with her because obviously we're trying to get her to, find her place in this new world. So that was interesting to me. But as a character herself, I didn't, like immediately feel like, oh, this is like the strongest, best character that I read this year, and I really love her. So it was like a slow burn for me. And that was for a lot of the characters as well. And I wonder if that comes down to the culture and also the language, because they play a lot with language. And they are a little bit reserved, aren't they, until you become a close friend. There's a lot of barbed or they play with language that so that they might be having a polite conversation with someone, but actually they're also potentially insulting you. And
Yeah.
I think that makes, it gives that sort of distance. And therefore, I felt a bit of distance with the characters themselves, because a lot of it was sort of this one-upmanship.
Yeah.
And then you have to figure out, are they actually likable? And when I say likable, it doesn't mean like they're morally upright, because there's some questionable stuff that's going on, throughout in the book, and some characters that I actually like haven't done the greatest things, but it took me a while to really warm up to people.
I agree. I think there's like so much world building up front that it takes up all the oxygen in the room, so to speak. So you're just spending all your time trying to understand how this world functions, who is who, especially with, the naming conventions, as we just said, they being like so out of our comfort zone, like anything that we know as names, it's so different. Any of the naming conventions that you might be familiar with, it's completely different. And so we're just playing catch up for, I think, the first 25% of the book. And then by that time, you get to know a few of these characters, and they're just, I don't know, can we swear on your channel, Margaret? Because they're just, a-holes. Like, there's such, pretentious, superior idiots so much of the time. And they insist on calling Mahit barbarian all the time. And they seem to think like that's, an endearing thing to do, which they're basically just calling her a savage who has somehow, they're just, they give this impression as if they are absolutely stunned because it's like a chimpanzee suddenly started speaking English. They're just like, what? Like, how to communicate like us? And they're just insufferable. So that takes a while. And then you get to know them and you get to know what's happening. And it's like a whole bunch of things happen. And especially, I think, in like the last 30 to 40% is when the action really like heats up. And so you just get to like really get to know people and what's happening. So, yeah.
And again, coming back to what you said about the way that people speak and that superiority because of the culture, they sort of like see themselves above. And I thought it was very cleverly done. It sort of comes back to what you're saying about the microaggressions, where someone is very well-meaning when they say something to Mahit. And they thought, this will be taken as a compliment, and it just like stabs her in the heart. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's so well done.
Yeah.
I appreciated the way that they had, so they had this reverence for literature, but also for poems in a specific sort of didactic order with pentameter, whatever, 15 syllable whatevers, right? And so that's another thing I sort of skimmed over because I didn't want to have to actually think through what that would sound like. But when I read the poetic verses that they did include, I thought, oh, the author is making this really simple so that I can even understand the double meaning, and the sort of political meaning. So I appreciated that, but I also realized that it's way dumbed down if I can get it when it's supposed to be 2 languages removed. So that was interesting. I thought, okay, taking notes, Arkady. That should be that well.
I actually really enjoy the fact that, you have this entire technological space empire, and apparently, it can all be brought to its knees by some dude writing verse, and publishing it in his blog, basically, the Teixcalaan version of scrolling on Medium or something, like publishing a Medium post and then seeing it go viral, and just completely changing the way the empire works. That's amazing.
Would you say that's hopeful, considering all the parallels, or unrealistic?
No, I think that's actually, it's something that she's taken from real life, because if I were to talk to you as a South Asian, we have a very long-standing tradition of poetry basically being the language of revolution. To this day, there are we have like a whole tradition of poets who write about the revolution. We had that during the British Empire, like when we had our independence struggle. We had like a whole bunch of poets who just wrote like revolutionary poetry, and it continued even after independence, and we still sing their songs. And we, like every time there's a protest or something, like we had like 2 years ago, we had these massive countrywide protests in India against these very discriminatory laws that came about. And everybody was, singing the songs by this Pakistani poet called Faiz Ahmed Faiz, who wrote these very stirring. He was a Marxist, and he wrote these very stirring poems about like people deserving equality. And those were the poems that we sang all the time. So yeah, it's very true to life, I think.
So forgive me if this is repeating. I didn't hear all of what you said, but I'm wondering, when I think of beginning of what you said, the language of revolution, it seems to correlate with African American gospel spirituals that they would sing at protests and stuff in the 60s. And so I'm thinking, is it in the conqueror's language, if you will, or is it separate? And is it similar to the book or different in that way?
No, it's in Urdu and in Hindi. And we have it in all our languages, like there's a tradition in Malayalam, in Tamil, like it's very much in the vernacular. It's meant for like the most political ones were meant for the masses who, we have like varying degrees of literacy. So you might not know English, you might not be able to read and write, but you know how to sing a song in your own language. And if it's catchy enough, and like these are very catchy poems. And in our traditions, we usually sing our poems. So you don't just like recite them, you also sing them. And they're so you can recite them, but you can also sing them. So it becomes very easy to disseminate the ideas that are being conveyed by these poems.
Very cool.
Bye, Margaret.
I'll be back in a moment. But I was just thinking, that you explained that so well, and I'm so tempted to go almost into spoiler territory, because obviously when we talk about the poetry, you get towards that end section where obviously Mahit has sort of like linked in to the ability of using that language and the blog, the dissemination and that sort of thing. And it has one effect, and then it's sort of like picked up and changed. And I found that interesting, with the emperor right at the end, because she then starts to think about this is what she had, created, and then it gets picked up by the empire and turned into something new. And I found that fascinating, because I was like, oh, that's just one more thing, because it was the same thing with the technology that they have on the space station that forms this sort of like intrigue and interest from the empire in what's going on at the space station and how does this affect us. And I was thinking about how the emperor's like views of how to use the same technology would again change something that's fundamental to the way that this culture works on the space station, and turn it into what Teixcalaan is all about, which quite a bit of it is around I don't know what the word is, but it's sort of like taking over, isn't it? It's about control. So yeah.
Are we ready to go into spoilers, Margaret? Because I think like
Sure. I was hovering over the banner, so here we go. So from now
Okay,
on out, there be present. It's taking a while to show up, but yeah. Spoiler alert. Yeah. Go ahead. Break it on down.
Go on, Katja.
Okay, so the points that I was thinking about were around the technology, the embargo, and the idea that the emperor has as well in using the embargo in a totally different way from what it's meant to be. So obviously on the space station, it's about not losing the expertise because they are a small community, and they, it's about being able to hand down knowledge about keeping themselves safe as well, because a space station is so perilous to live on. I mean, they've got all these warnings about, what fire will be dangerous, this will be dangerous, everything, is dangerous. So they have to remember these things. And I think that's where the name of the book is also really interesting, a memory called Empire, because we keep going into this whole idea of memory. And then I was thinking about social memory and history. So the history of the space station, a lot of it is embedded in the technology, and they never lose their identity. They integrate with the memory of past people, and that's an integration. Whereas with Teixcalaan, they've been, constantly taking over things. And then when the emperor hears about this technology, what's his thought? It's like, oh, I've got this 90% clone, and I could, because he's really young, I could totally have him, taken over by my memories going into this embargo, and then he will be a new me in a way. And it's totally like wiping out the identity of this boy, so to speak. So I was just like, that's fascinating, to think about the different ways that they use the same technology, and also to show how Teixcalaan takes over and twists or changes what other people have to fit their purposes.
Yeah, that was really like when my head, realizes what the emperor was thinking to do. And, like her reaction to it was like, yeah, like it was disgusting, because what he's basically going to do is like take this child and, like snatch its body, basically, like that's what the plan was. And it's, like you said, like it's a really great example of how the imperatives of empire can somehow, you think that you're doing the good thing, but by placing the empire first, and by placing the need for it to be powerful first, it really is a great way to lose your humanity and your basic decency, which is again like a really great comment on colonialism and about imperialism, and about how it changes people, and how the greatest heroes of an empire are usually the ones that have usually done things that are terrible and that no human being should ever do to another human being. Those were like really great like little juxtapositions that really like made me want to like, this book just made me want to like, every couple of chapters I would stop and I would like think about it, and I would be like, oh my God, and then I would just go back and start reading again. So yeah.
I'm also thinking about the twist at the end. I don't know, Margaret, if you've got another question, because I was just thinking about the twist at the end, with who ends up in power. I don't know about you both, but I thought there was going to be a further twist. I wondered to myself, is she so good and manipulative, because she ended up being a little bit different from what I thought? Could she have maneuvered everything to put them all in a position where she's the only choice, but actually it ended up not being that interesting? It ended up being, she's the only choice, but not because she maneuvered it that way.
Yeah. I didn't actually feel that way at all. Like I knew the emperor was probably the one that was like the most twisty-turny, you know?
Yep.
I didn't know he was going to die. That was a surprise. But the way that things fell out felt natural to me. I've got a spoiler question, not about the end, but about the shock from the system. It's never really addressed. Like, it's just a malfunction that 3 Seagrass gets shocked when she hits the wall and the sort of technology backfires on her. Do you guys have ideas about that? Is it just a plot device, or is there some reasoning, or, you know, like, why did that happen, do you think?
I don't think I remember.
I think it's to do with the guy who controls the system. So everyone says that no one individual person has got control over it, but I think that to a certain extent he did, and that was a fear of Mahit's, especially with those police officers when they're so synchronized with the city as well, because everyone's saying, oh, it's just, you know, the system, no one has control over it, and you're like, yeah, but what's feeding the system? But I'd also agree with coffee over apples. Yes, she's an amazing liar, wasn't she? Because, you know, like when she saves Mahit's life, I was like, oh, that's so nice. She saved her. And then you find out, oh, okay, hang on. She could have like not put her in that position in the first place.
Yeah. Steph is totally right. And here, okay, so one of the quotes that I outlined, page 287 on the paperback, was about this very thing. A city run by an algorithm designed to respond to Teixcalaan desires was not innocent of those same Teixcalaan desires, magnified, twisted by machine learning. A city run by an algorithm designed by 10 Pearl could suddenly rise up against anyone 10 Pearl designated. And I was just thinking, I've read all these articles about book learning and our social media, Facebook, and all this kind of stuff about the algorithm and what it's doing to us. And I was like, ding, 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 ding. Like,
Yeah.
That was one of the parallels that I really appreciated. Just slipped in there just once. But, you know, you were thinking about it all along and how this city alive responds to people. But that one shock, I was like, is he going in and like fiddling with the levers? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it could be reflecting his protection of his security system, but that was a little bit of a shortcut.
And who killed? Oh no, I'm going to forget his name. Who killed the previous ambassador's attaché? Who was responsible for that guy's death?
Oh yeah, the bomb.
Yeah, who was ultimately responsible for his death? That's like.
Wasn't that like because of the, yeah, wasn't it because of the power struggle?
Yeah, it was one of the political rivals. One of the other, it was either the minister or the other Eswazwakat that was like angling. I don't think it was One Lightning. It wasn't like a popular person.
Yeah, and
but it was explained.
I was still trying to figure out which one of them it was though, because I'm like, who killed the guy?
Yeah. Yeah. That's also one of those points that I sort of skim over where I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of people jockeying for position and one of them did it, you know? But yeah, the scene with the poison, all good points. All right, well, we're wrapping it up here at the end of the hour. I am so sorry that I could not be in this discussion more. I think I'm going to go back and put timestamps and just add comments to where you guys were saying things and I was just staring and disappeared. And that will be my contribution. But so anything else you want to say or who you'd recommend it to?
Amrita, do you want to go first?
Oh, I would recommend this book highly, but also I would say that this is a book that you do need to engage with. So if you're looking for something that's like very like, you know, like an easy read and stuff, then it's very readable, but it is something that really demands a level of engagement from the reader. So you do need to keep that in mind. And also, if you read this, then I would highly recommend that you read the sequel as well, because it's really just one extended novel, in my opinion. Like the two, this is like part 1, part 2, but it's a real part 1, part 2. And it works together brilliantly, like in terms of themes, in terms of story arc, like everything. There's like certain things that begin in this novel that don't really pay off until the second novel. So I would really recommend you read both books.
Is it meant to end with a desolation called peace, or is there supposed to be more? Because I'm like waiting to get the next one before like the next one comes out. Do you know?
As far as I'm aware, it's a duology. I don't know if she's working on another book. I have no idea.
Got it. Okay. Good. Then I want to go. One more treat. Trying to get the banner to come up here. Awesome. Well, before I get kicked off again, thank you guys so much for coming to discuss this amazing book. Super excited for the sequel. I'm super excited to watch it and find out what you said.
Well, thanks for hosting, and Amrita, thanks for putting us onto this book because, it was fantastic. It was good.
Thank you both for inviting me to your buddy read discussion. This was really fun.
Yay! Cool. All right. Thanks for coming by and stopping in the comments, giving us your thoughts, everybody. Really appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good week.